Hi everyone. In the past year, I have noticed a steady feed of news, through official media, about HDB lease expiry, beginning with National Development Minister Lawrence Wong's cautioning statement for the public to not assume that all HDB flats will be eligible for the Selective en Bloc Redevelopment Scheme, or SERS. It all came to a head, with Prime Minister Lee's National Day rally speech, where he clearly stated that HDB leases will eventually expire. There exists the tacit belief among many Singaporeans that HDB leases are effectively perpetual, not that the Singaporean government will not be able to reacquire the HDB plots when the leases come due, but that the government will absolutely, quote-unquote, compensate HDB lessees in one way or another. This, in large part, comes from the cynical view that the majority of voters reside in HDB flats, and the government must find an out, which does not risk angering the voters when their leases expire. The notion of the de facto perpetual lease was reinforced by several high-profile implementation of SERS, including the government acquisition of Rocher Centre, where affected residents were given generous compensation and rehousing benefits, with the opportunity to opt for new 99-year lease HDB flats. Believing that SERS is this compensation, in the past few years, opportunistic Singaporeans further bidded up the prices of older HDB flats. To disabuse the public of this erroneous belief, the government started a concerted and progressive effort to clarify the idea of the 99-year leasehold, I believe, beginning in earnest with Minister Wong's cautionary statement in March 2017 previously mentioned. During the National Day rally speech, Prime Minister Lee proposed the Voluntary en Bloc Redevelopment Scheme, or VERS, offering a quote-unquote out, for expiring HDB leases at year 70. Believers of the de facto perpetual lease did not take the clarification well. In the few days after the National Day rally speech, there were plenty of negative commentary and corresponding official responses in both social and official media, ranging from the more extreme, HDB prices will crash variant, in the former, to the more measured indirect sniping at the proposal in the latter, like suggesting the populace recognize leasehold for HDB flats as tenancy, rather than ownership. Through the Straits Times, the government responded as follows.
Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong set out on Friday, August 24, why home ownership is a key national policy, saying it gives every Singaporean a stake in the country, and has improved lives significantly for all. On the issue of 99-year HDB leases, Mr. Lee refuted the notion that the lease is, quote, merely an extended rental, unquote, and not a sale. He said he found the argument by some commentators, quote-unquote, frankly amazing, as many private properties are also held on 99-year leases, but no one argues they are merely being rented. HDB lessees have all the rights over their flats that owners of such leasehold private properties have. You can live in it, you can transact it, you can bequeath it to your children, it is yours, said Mr. Lee. In fact, HDB owners enjoy extra privileges, because their flats get upgraded from time to time with generous government funding, he added. While Mr. Lee did not name the commentators he was referring to, the Straits Times had published a commentary on August 14 by International Property Advisor Chief Executive Khoo Swee Yong, who recommended that we be honest with ourselves and recognize that we are merely lessees who rent the HDB flats for their terms. Public housing was one of the hot-button issues Mr. Lee addressed at the National Day rally on Sunday, when he announced several long-term housing initiatives in response to concerns over expiring HDB leases. Returning to the issue today, he said home ownership enables every Singaporean to share in the country's economic growth, because as the economy grows, so will the value of their home. Nearly every household, even low-income ones, has a substantial asset to their name. As a result, we have improved lives significantly for all and avoided the extremes of privation and poverty often seen even in affluent societies, he said. The Prime Minister noted the government could have adopted other policies to house the population, such as providing rental flats at subsidized rates, having controlled rents like in San Francisco, or leaving housing largely to the private market, like in Hong Kong. But none of these alternatives would have achieved the same economic and social results as home ownership, because the experience of other cities show the private market will not provide adequately for poor or even middle-income families, Mr. Lee said. He added that rental housing creates a very different mindset from owning a home, as a tenant lives from month to month and has no interest in the property's long-term value as he cannot sell the property or leave it to his children. It is not yours. In comparison, a homeowner takes responsibility for his property, thinks long-term and does his best to protect its value, he said. This is done directly through good maintenance and upkeep, and also indirectly by upholding the society and system on which the value of his home depends, he added. That is why HDB sells flats to Singaporeans at highly subsidized rates, he said. It is also why HDB prefers to sell very heavily subsidized flats to low-income households rather than offer them a subsidized rental unit at cheap rents, he added.
I felt that the Prime Minister delivered a decent response, asking how it is that the detractors never did consider the 99-year leasehold of private properties also being quote-unquote, merely an extended rental. Rather than negatively impacting the price of HDB flats, the proposal for the possibility of collective sales of aged HDB flats is another freebie for HDB lessees, and should contribute positively to the demand for HDB flats. Thus, all the detractors are complaining about, would be that the government has clarified that leasehold for HDB flats actually means leasehold. Unless, if the complaint is that the government should allow some to continue believing the existence of the de facto perpetual lease. From the rest of the article, derived from a recent speech by the Prime Minister, it is obvious that Mr. Lee, and by extension, the Singaporean government, believes that home ownership has substantial social upside, beyond just being a financial asset. While I would concur in principle, this is another topic for another time. And by the way, while I do not know much about the situation in Hong Kong, I can attest that the housing policy in San Francisco is a disaster. The place is now a shithole. There are legitimate concerns raised about lease expiry for needy residents, like perhaps elderly residents without the means to pay for new housing, be they participants of the proposed VERS scheme or otherwise. There is precedence in the making. The Singapore Land Authority is overseeing the reacquisition of 191 private terrace houses in the Geylang area, with land leases expiring in 2020, providing a learning experience for the government to deal with land reacquisition. For HDB flats, there are additional programs in existence, like the Fresh Start Housing Scheme, and Flexi-Flat Scheme, linked below, to help the needy by allowing them to trade affordability for conditions like shortened leases, increased minimum occupancy requirements, and the ability to sell one's flat on the open market. The reacquisition of HDB flats due to lease expiry is still decades into the future. The implementation of the VERS scheme is a halfway milestone 20 years away. From the perspective of an observer of US politics, it is refreshing to see a government be able to make plans so far ahead into the future. Oh well, again, another discussion for another day. In conclusion, it is due time for the Singaporean government to progressively flesh out its policies for HDB flats getting closer to the end of their leases. It will be interesting to see how the conversation will play out as we head into the next parliamentary election. Thank you very much for watching.
In San Francisco, high on a hill.